Okay. One of the questions I wanted to ask, because I know that we spent a lot of time talking about your personal experience, but I think it's really important for the people in the room who maybe don't have Black LGBT folks on their staff, or necessarily may not have to talk about those things, to really kind of hone in on why they need to be writing about our stories, and what are the stories that they need to be kind of writing about. What are the things, or what are the main topics about our lives that can be kind of part of the LGBT mainstream, which is really interesting to say that, because it's marginalized, but yet, you know, we're not on the cover of the Advocate as much, and we're not on the cover of Out, and we're not always the spokespeople. So I would like to maybe have the panel kind of talk more to us about what needs to be written about, what are the main topics of our lives, and how do we include Black LGBT people in stories that aren't just about Black LGBT people? How do we create kind of a community in our stories? If that's something you guys want to answer, I just think that would be really helpful for some of the people in our
Panel.
So you're asking, all right, so you want to know for a mainstream organization? Or
I think I'm asking a lot. I think, so I think with panels like these, it's really important to hear your personal experiences, because I definitely think that as an LGBT writer, I've definitely written for LGBT ally writer, a writer who writes about LGBT folks but isn't LGBT. That's what I'm going to say. And I've written for some of these mainstream LGBT organizations, and I have to say that to get, back in the day, to get a story published about Black people was really difficult. I mean, I had an editor, I won't say what magazine it is because I think I might get sued for my last panel I was on, so I'm going to keep it real vague. But I wrote a story about Noah's Ark being canceled, and like what's the state of like Black LGBT male, Black gay men in media, and the editor was basically just like, well, you know, why do I care about this story? These aren't, how do you get me to care about these Black LGBT folks, because I'm not Black LGBT. And this is what I'm hearing on the phone. And so, I mean, when we're talking about writing about Black LGBT lives, I mean, there's a lot going on. There's BET, there's Black media who's going to write about it, and then there's white LGBT media who's going to write about it. And so, like, I think that for people in the audience who may not know, or to first of all talk about why diversity matters. What are the issues that affect Black people that white journalists or non-Black journalists need to be paying attention to? And then how do we create stories that include Black folks? So like the fact that if you have a story on marriage, not everyone in the story needs to be white. And so I think that that would be really helpful as part of the conversation to have on this panel, if that's possible. Not to steal your shine or your job.
Oh no, I mean it's.
I just think there has to be takeaways
for
when people need to know, like, okay, this is what I'm going to do when I go back to work next week.
Okay.
So really, I mean, for me, it's a really weird question to answer because we've always been about diversity. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, Windy City Times, as long as I can remember, and outlines is always, you know, talks about Black issues, white issues, Latino issues, like we try and cover the whole gamut. So,
Part I think of what Kelly's saying is that's a conscious thing, though. So how do you how do you make the decisions about news with that consciousness? Like how practically for other people who are in LGBT media?
How do you reach someone who really isn't in that same mindset
right.
that we are?
Right.
That's what I thought.
Right.
Is that?
Well, it's just about checking your own privilege and your own bias, and I think it's about holding your staff accountable. But I think it's really important to at least have a conversation about what can you do. Like if you work at an LGBT or a paper that isn't as exclusive or as bright as Windy City Times, what can someone do today?
Right,
what can you guys tell them today that they can walk out of this room and the next time they go on their staff meeting, they can say, yo, we need to do, well, you may not say yo, but you know what I'm saying? Like, what are tangible things that people can take to make sure that diversity, that they're able to articulate that diversity is important with this community and why is it?
Well, let me try. I haven't been in that situation because I've again have run my own thing. But one of the things, and I want to go somewhere else and then come back. One of the things that I've always had in mind about getting things that are important to you out there is to do them in a way that it makes sense to the boss. And I'm thinking about a number of people years ago were doing small black films about black families, and Hollywood wasn't releasing them. And it was like, well, we need diversity in Hollywood. You know, I just made a film about a small black family in Mississippi, and it's not being released in 1,000 theaters across the nation. And I would always think, yeah, that's a good idea, but Hollywood isn't about, you know, small black anythings across the nation. It's about making money, you know. And if you want to get a point across in Hollywood, you have to figure out a way that the studios are going to make money doing it. And I thought that Steven Spielberg did it the right way. He wanted to do Schindler's List. He didn't do Schindler's List first. He did Jaws first and made a lot of money. And he did Raiders of the Lost Ark and made a lot of money. And then once he became Steven Spielberg, it's like, I want to do Schindler's List. You know, I'm Steven Spielberg. I'm going to do Schindler's List. You know. So back to this is perhaps, and you know, each situation is different, perhaps it's bringing the story in a way that makes sense to the organization given whatever their perspective is. And maybe you don't pitch the story that would be perfect for the community first. Maybe you pitch a half a story or pitch it in such a way that it's going to be accepted. And I know that this is an accommodationist point of view, but you know, it might work on certain organizations.
Yeah, quickly, I'm actually going to tell you sort of about a story I've been trying to pitch for like the last 2 years that has not been able, like I haven't been able to like get it through to editors, and I'm still struggling with it. So there's a story about Chicago homeless teens who want HIV, so that they get government assistance, so they can get housing and they can get you know, medical, you know, dental, all that good stuff. So I've been pitching this story. I have like 5 people I've interviewed and talked to, and pitch this story to like these mainstream outlets. And I have not been successful with getting that, because I think predominantly because it's African American males that I've interviewed and talked to about the story that the story's about, that I haven't been able to really get it across to like the Red Eye or to the Advocate or to other gay publications, that they don't really get the whole like the power in this story. But I asked someone the same question, like, how can I pitch this differently to different organizations, different publications, so that I can actually get this story told to a mainstream audience? And he said, you have to speak their language.
I don't know, that story just makes my stomach hurt.
Yeah,
like, that's not to like.
No, I know.
That story makes my stomach hurt.
It's the crazy.
And I actually think that Out published a story similar to that last year, and that was
Oh, really?
But I think what makes that hurt my stomach isn't that like it's not the truth or it's not happening. I just think of all the stories we could be telling about black homeless black men, you know, from urban areas. This whole notion of I want to get HIV, it just seems so sensationalized. Yeah, it takes it to I don't know. And that's the thing, is like, as a journalist, you want to tell the story.
Yeah.
And you don't, I don't know, it just makes my stomach hurt.
Are you gay?
Yes, very.
Okay. So it's also doubly bizarre that you would want to push that into the public realm. Like, if it's such like a small people, like the far right would get a hold of that story and use it against the community. So it's like.
But is that a reason not to report it?
Yeah. No. But I think we would rather be selective.
I'm sure you would nuance it.
If we could, this gentleman here has a question he's been trying to ask.
Yes, I actually was very torn between coming to this workshop and the workshop How We Count Data Reporting in LGBTQ Issues. because I thought the direction of this workshop was going to be more around the African American LGBTQ media. And I'm at a loss. I don't feel that I'm being given that. And I want to direct my question first to you, Alan, and then I'm sorry, brother, I forgot to Andrew, because I think I can address the issue that you're raising. African American LGBTQ media as opposed to Black media in general, whether we're talking about an Indigo or WVON, is in trouble. And the reason is because of the lack of access to capital and to markets. I mean, let's call a thing a thing. And Alan, what I find disturbing about the way you frame the context, the conversation originally, is that you did not want to have a conversation around racism. And so as Yana Banan says, we got to call a thing a thing. It is racism. And so I am at a loss that there is not a real, authentic, genuine Black media that speaks to the Black community and that deals with Black issues. Now, having functioned in corporate America, white corporate America, I know that there are certain things that if you don't meet their logic model or the agenda of the corporate model, it's not going to be considered. And so I think it's no less true of what industry you're in. If it doesn't meet the bottom line, if it doesn't drive revenue, I mean, these are real decisions. They're not trying to tell our story.
Who is that?
Mainstream media. So if you're working for, and to make the question that you raised, it's a different issue if you're working for a mainstream publication as opposed to a Black-owned, operated, by us, for us, supported by us, the Defender. I mean, all of these media outlets are in trouble. And for some reason have not been able, not for some reason, but for very specific reasons, have not been able to exist. Because if we control our media, if there was an authentic, genuine African-American LGBTQ media, this conversation would be just a whole lot different. And so, or even Latino. I mean, I think the Latino community has a stronger media presence. I mean, they have a real entity. They have an engine that I think is lacking in the African American community. So I'm just very, I'm a little disappointed, actually, in terms of what I'm being given here. And it's really a sad commentary for me in terms of where we are. And I'm really, really, really a little disappointed to hear that things are where they are.
Well, actually, I would like to get a response first.
Start with Alan, because I sense that
well, first of all, I personally am interested in creating publications for the Black gay and lesbian community. That's my personal. That's where my passion is. So, so what's happening in the mainstream gay and lesbian community, and the diversity that's going there? I mean, I'm interested in it, but that's not where my passion is. My passion is, I think, where you are. That's what I would like to be doing, and that's what I think is important.
But Alan, I'm 60 years old. Okay. So we're probably more generationally connected, because I understood everything you were talking about in context. I've never had a problem being gay. My issues, I've had more problems being African American than I have being gay. I'm a double minority, but my issues have not been because I'm gay, because I know how to get people out of my business in that area. But when I walk into a room, I am Black. There's nothing I can, I'm going, hey man, what's up, dude, whatever. And, you may ask, is he gay? Is that his girlfriend? So, but this, so I'm a double minority. So I know that, there's discrimination, but I've always wanted to do a workshop or a topic around racism, sexism, and homophobia, kind of really discuss all of that, because it's the same stuff, but you have racists who are sexist and homophobic. You have sexists who are racist, and you know what I'm saying? It's the same thing. But I mean, it's and for me, like I said, the reason that I came here is that I am very interested in getting messages out and getting information to people, in the media obvious the way to do that. But I know that no one is going to save us, from us, for us, but us, and sometimes we are our own worst enemies. That's the question that I actually wanted to ask you. What kind of issues are you writing about, and where do you get your subject matter from? And what is that process? How is it vetted in terms of what actually reaches print as opposed to what doesn't reach print? Because I think at the end of the day, I think I'm more in tune with what's going on the south and west sides of Chicago than people who may be very well funded on the north side that are controlling the issues and controlling the whatever. But we're never going to change the dynamic in terms of the quality of life until we begin to harness and really take charge of. And if that means not working for a red eye, but creating your own red eye, whatever that means. You know, the John Johnson kind of story, how did he really... I don't see those stories. Those are the stories that I thought I was going to hear about, people doing exciting, innovative things around Black LGBT community. That's not what I'm getting at.
So I hear a lot of questions, so let's have
a lot of concerns.
Responses.
Yeah, so we have written many human interest stories. That sounds like what you're talking about in a way.
No, I'm not really interested in human interest stories. I'm interested in stories that will have a net effect in terms of being game changers, in terms of being impacting structural change, in terms of getting people energized in such a way that there's a paradigm shift. For example, people taking information. I'll give you an example. People taking information and statistics on communities of color and getting funding for multi-million-dollar organizations, specifically around HIV and AIDS. Many of these organizations, and the problem still hasn't moved off the dime. People of color are still dying at disproportionate rates and and millions and millions and millions of dollars. So they're not really speaking culturally to the populations, and they're not getting the job done, and the dollars are being spent. Pookie and Shaquita can't go down there and get that money and run. You know, I mean, well, they're speaking the language, okay? Because they don't know how to put these documents together. They don't know how to write.
Now is that Black media is stepping in and doing the work that I see the mainstream LGBT, and not to toot BET's horn, because I know. I'm sorry. I have my issues and that's my job, but I'll say this, is that like you see Ebony.com is doing a hell of a lot of work on LGBT stuff. I work at BET, and let me tell you, they never tell me no. If I want to do some trans girl stuff today, Kelly, you do your trans girl stuff. They never have told me I couldn't do anything. The Griot is doing really good work, and so I think it's part of the conversation about having it. What does it mean to be a Black journalist writing about LGBT issues? We can't have that conversation unless we give Black media, even though they've been slow to the game. But in the past 5 years, we've seen huge strides in that. So when we're talking about media, we have to be really clear about what media are we referring to. Right. And I just like to say that if anyone on the panel does want to write for BET, you have a column that you want to write about Black, what it means to be Black and gay, you let me know. Because and email these other places. I mean, I think that's about bridging the gap about like what the work you do, and then how does that fit into the larger spectrum. Because if you're thinking that the New York Times is going to write a story about you that isn't about AIDS and something like completely sensationalized, it's not going to happen. But the media that looks like you, but doesn't always treat you like you can, may still publish that story. And I think what's happening is that we're realizing through social media and through all of this, like, you can't ignore the Black LGBT community. Those trans girls will get you together on Twitter if you think that you're going to ignore them. And I think that that's kind of what's been happening, is that Black media is finally getting it together and opening the doors to create our stories. So
Finally, yeah.
I just think that that's something that we have to at least acknowledge.
I know you have a question back there, but if if you want a quick response to her, and then I'll get right to you.
My response is, I guess, is to both of you. First of all, just one quickie. If you're looking for a story that's going to be a game changer, I don't know that one story exists. So you may be looking for more from the media or any kind of media that's possible. But one thing that I think that is important, that speaks to what you said and what she said, is the messenger. That even if Outlines or BET is the most inclusive media available, do everything absolutely right, they are still not Black LGBT publications, you know. And if something is printed or said by the Black LGBT media, it's heard differently. We talked about Ferguson. You started to talk about Ferguson. I'm not sure where you were going to go.
I think I mentioned the word Ferguson in
But this guy, as I understand it, I guess everybody agrees on that he was walking down the middle of the street, and the cop decided he shouldn't be walking down the middle of the street. Okay, so now, if a cop with the uniform on tells him not to walk down the middle of the street, that happens in a certain context. Now, if a Black cop does it, it'd be a little different, but it's still similar. But if grandma sitting on the porch across the street says, "Hey, you two, get out the middle of the street," the same message, it's heard differently, you know. And one of the things, that's one of the reasons why I think that a Black LGBT media is necessary, because it's heard differently, because it's coming from us. You know, just in the same way that Black folks can tell jokes that Jews can't, or you know where I'm going, you know, or you know, the messenger is important, you know.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Ashley Love, and I'm a journalist. And thank you for starting the LGBT trend. No, thank you for using LGBT, because in the beginning I was hearing gay from the panel instead of LGBT, and I was feeling excluded, so I appreciate that. So my question is about Black LGBT media. As we all know, what's going on in Ferguson is a tragedy. However, in North and South America, every week a Black or Latina trans woman is murdered. And I noticed that a lot of times the mainstream, well, not a lot of times, all the times, the mainstream press does not cover it. You know, I mean, we will go picture them, and they'll be like, "Oh, we don't have time today, we don't have time this week." Then the next week they're like, "Oh, well, that's old news now, it's a week old." So they always come up with like new creative reasons not to cover the story. So my suggestion I have is, because Black and gay journalists have more social acceptance and clout and higher positions in the media world than trans people. So a suggestion I have is, you know, because we have a lot of gay and lesbian journalists working in the mainstream level, where trans people usually are devoted to freelance, blogging, you know, on just kind of like our lives on the margins, right? And so I think that if our gay and lesbian journalists on the inside could start, you know, pitching more to write these stories, I think we could maybe draw more awareness to this cause, you know, because we really need them to be allies. Like, I mean, this is an epidemic, you know. I mean, I'm 34, but ever since I've been 17, like one by one, like half of my friends I grew up with that were trans have died for different reasons, you know, whether it was like hate crime, disease, suicide, improper health care, and it goes on and on. So there's a lot of like, you know, trauma there, and it doesn't matter how, you know, well, you know, we riot or what we do, just like so many doors keep on, you know, slamming in our faces. So I guess my question is, do you guys ever cover this epidemic, or do you mainly just cover it when it's about Trayvon Martin or Ferguson and stuff that affects black men, but not necessarily trans women.
Andrew, I'd like to hear from you because I know.
Yeah, we've covered a ton of trans-related issues. In fact, this week we have a profile of Denisha McShawn. Denisha McShawn, and this about how she fought for her right to be trans. Just a whole long profile about her. But again, we've done a range of things, everything from interviewing the supermodel who came out as trans to we have covered what's gone on in South America regarding the very unfortunate deaths. I was just really hurt by what you said about trans people not being able to, they're not, I guess, reporters or in the upper levels of the jobs. I mean, we have a news reporter who is trans. I totally believe in all types of inclusion, and just hearing what you said really hurts. I know it happens, but yeah, it just really hurt nonetheless.
I'd love to meet her.
Yeah, give her info. Question will talk with you. She'll talk your off.
Any other responses to this question, or do we have any other questions? We are coming up on the 4:30 mark. Already? Yes.
If I can ask, I'm not black. Just
Fred!
so you know.
Not even that 1/16th that we
No. I actually loved hearing what you said about the need for a black LGBT media. My question is about the mainstream LGBT media, and you can certainly speak to that, but I'd like to hear others as well. If the minority of the readers of mainstream LGBT, like I don't know what your stats are in terms of what your percentage of African American readers.
It's minority of the readers.
It's the minority of the readers.
Yeah.
And it seems to be, all like we were talking before about the trans readership. But my question is, in terms of the mainstream LGBT media, do we continue to reach out to African American, gay African American, LGBT African American readers? Or do we say it's always going to be a minority of the readers of, I'm picking on Windy City Times because you're here, but it's any LGBT media. Do we say, well, it's just a minority of our readers, there's never going to be a large segment, so we let the black LGBT media handle it? Do you focus, at Windy City Times, for example, I know I'm picking on you, do you focus on growing the African American readership? If so, how do you do that? Or are you content with where things stand in terms of the African American readership of Windy City Times?
Well, no, I don't think we are ever content. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier, though, about there's only so much we can do to reach out to people at this point. And like I said, I know a ton of people and I've reached out to them constantly and they never get back to me. So it's kind of hard if you don't have a meeting of the minds.
Reaching out to
black LGBT individuals to let me know about people they know who may be going through situations, stories we can't write about, to let everyone else know.
So if they're not, I know I'm kind of dialoguing with you, I'm sorry. But if they're not getting back to you, why is that? Is it?
Some people just don't want to, for one reason or another, they just don't want to. I've talked with people who are gay, but they don't want people to know they're gay.
So is there, I'm just wondering if there's a perception that, well, you're white gay media, even though you're black, you're white gay media, so I'm not going to... Just how do you square the circle of bridging the gay African-American community with...
In terms of purely business model, Nielsen has done a lot of research around this. Typically, the black community is viewed monolithically. It's not broken down into LGBTQ or lesbian or gay, or just the black market. And it's kind of taken for granted. If we get them, fine. They're going to consume the product anyway. There isn't that much consideration given. As a matter of fact, African American marketers, market research companies are having a lot of problems now because the flavor of the month is Hispanic, Latino. They just assume that the African American, they're going to consume it. No, but they're going to consume. And so when you start talking about segmenting down to LGBTQ African American, what? Are you serious? So I mean, we already have a black face. And there's been some studies recently done. Cheryl Pearson, who's the senior vice president at Nielsen, I recently had a conversation with her around this, and she says it's just kind of like taken for granted. It's for you to segment that far down to LGBTQ. Anybody concerned about that? I mean, that's not the flavor of the month. And it's certainly not worth putting a budget line item, in your budget. So, to me, that speaks to structural, historical racism in terms of it's really that bad. And that's not to bash Windy City Times, or any, that's just the way it is. And that is a historical truth if you just, call the thing a thing. Because for me, I just look at the state of black media, whether you're talking about print media, and Indigo or Defender, or if you're talking about WVON, they're all in trouble. And so at the end of the day, my concern is that no one is ever going to tell my story, my way, for my benefit, like me. Now, I don't care what you say, you're never going to convince me that anybody else can articulate my story better than I. And I don't care how much money they have or how much window dressing they put in there. It's going to be a fake story. It's not going to be authentic.
But can I say something about, first of all, that's true, and what's great about these days is there's an internet, right? It's never been more easy to be a publisher.
Established media, ma'am. I'm talking about institutional.
Right. So Windy City Times is a way, we had for 10 years a publication called Black Lines. It was run by and for the African American community. It lost money every single month for 10 years. But it was a wonderful publication because it proved there were stories and it was flourishing, the content was flourishing, right? So that consciousness of that is in the current paper. And Andrew's saying that we just continue to work harder, right? We have writers who are African American, we have stories who are African American, but we will never represent all of the white or African American or Latino LGBT community. And for LGBT media in this country, the obligation, even though there's only 11 weeklies left and 13 bi-weeklies left, the obligation is to have stories told by African American LGBT people. So your staffs need to be more integrated. The staffs need to have more, like we talked about this morning, have trans reporters. If you don't have an integrated staff, you're not going to have integrated sources that are going to come to you with stories. So, but on top of that, I wish Alan still had BLK. BLK was an amazing, incredibly important legacy of LGBT media history, and it is missed. It is missed.
So can I ask you why don't you think why wasn't BLK successful?
Well, Alan.
No. I'm talking. I want to ask you that because you're obviously in the industry. So why wasn't he successful? There was a market need. There was a niche. I would dare say, just by way of suggestion, that it had to do with access to capital and access to market. If he had been given $5 or $10 million he doesn't appear to be ignorant. He seems to be fairly savvy. If he had had the resources, I think he could have made a go of it. But I'm sure there were forces. He said he was sued by Newsweek. Why would Newsweek sue somebody like that? They stomped him before he got a chance to get
Censorship.
That's a big question. We can talk about that. But since we're coming up on the ending, I would like to answer
right now, just so you know.
I would like to answer your question very, very shortly, which is that I understand what should a publication like Outlines do vis-a-vis the minority LGBT community. And I wanted to say that we faced a similar situation because although we were a black LGBT publication, there in Los Angeles was also a black lesbian publication because obviously she felt that we weren't covering the black lesbian community well enough or that the voice wasn't authentic. But the fact that that publication existed didn't stop us from doing what we thought was right and to try to cover the L part of black to the best of our ability, even though that separate publication still was in existence. So.
All right, well.